Cowboy, before you say another word, answer me this." Her voice was barely a whisper, yet it cut through the desert night sharper than cold steel. "Do you just want my body, like everyone else's?" The fire between them crackled softly, throwing restless shadows across the canyon walls. Jacob Walker remained perfectly still. He neither defended himself nor looked away. The silence lingered so long that even the wind seemed unwilling to disturb it. Then, instead of speaking, he slowly removed the revolver from his belt, laid it on the sand beside the fire, and stepped back into the darkness where she could see both of his empty hands. Only 3 hours earlier, neither of them had known the other's name. The Arizona sun had been sinking behind a maze of crimson cliffs when Jacob guided his tired bay horse through a forgotten canyon trail. Dust drifted lazily behind every hoofstep. The scent of dry sage and warm stone filled the air, while vultures circled high above, patient as old judges waiting for another tragedy to finish unfolding. Then came the scream. Not loud, not desperate. It was the sound of someone who had already stopped expecting anyone to come. Jacob turned his horse without hesitation. The narrow trail opened into a clearing where 4 mounted men surrounded a lone Apache woman. Her black shawl had been torn away, revealing bruises across one shoulder where rough hands had dragged her through the dust. Blood stained one sleeve of her buckskin dress, but her chin remained lifted with quiet defiance. One outlaw grabbed her wrist. "You'll thank us before this day's over." She answered with silence. The second man laughed. "You Apache women always pretend you're stronger than you are." Without warning, she struck him across the mouth with the back of her hand. The sound echoed against the cliffs. The laughter disappeared. The outlaw's face twisted with rage as he raised his revolver. Jacob's rifle spoke first. The bullet shattered a rock inches from the man's boot, sending sharp fragments across the ground. Every head turned. A lone cowboy sat motionless at the edge of the clearing. His rifle rested steadily across his saddle. His expression revealed nothing. "That's far enough," Jacob said. One outlaw smirked. "You riding alone, cowboy?" Jacob nodded once. "Looks that way." The leader glanced toward his companions before smiling with the confidence of a man who believed numbers always won. "Then you've made yourself a dead man." Jacob's eyes never left the Apache widow. "No." A long pause settled over the canyon. "I've made today harder than you expected." Something inside his voice unsettled them. There was no anger, no challenge, only certainty. The horses shifted uneasily. The breeze carried loose sand between them. Finally, the leader spat into the dirt. "This ain't worth dying over." He jerked his reins. "Let's go." The riders disappeared beyond the canyon bend, their curses fading into the evening wind. Only after the sound of hoofbeats vanished did Jacob lower his rifle. The Apache woman stumbled but refused to fall. She searched the ground until her fingers found a small knife hidden beneath a broken saddlebag. The blade rose instantly toward him. "Stay where you are." Jacob obeyed. 20 feet separated them, close enough to speak, far enough for her to believe she still possessed one thing no one had managed to steal: control. Without a word, Jacob removed his canteen from the saddle and placed it on a flat stone halfway between them. Then he stepped back again. "It's yours if you want it." She looked at the water, then at the cowboy. Her dark eyes narrowed, searching his face for the familiar bargain that always followed kindness. After a long silence, she asked the question that had survived every wound she carried. "Cowboy, do you just want my body like everyone else's?" Jacob did not answer. The question remained suspended between them, heavier than the revolver resting beside the fire. Flames crackled softly, sending sparks into the velvet sky while the scent of burning mesquite drifted through the narrow canyon. Somewhere in the darkness, a lonely coyote called across the desert, its mournful cry fading into endless silence. The Apache widow never lowered her knife. Her breathing was steady. Her eyes were not. They carried the exhausted vigilance of someone who had survived too many nights by refusing to believe in kindness. Jacob had seen those eyes before, not in strangers, in soldiers returning from war, in children who had lost entire families to winter, in men who no longer recognized themselves after years of violence. Trust did not disappear all at once. It died one betrayal at a time. "I've heard every answer," she finally said. "They all begin with gentle words." Jacob slowly reached toward his belt. Her grip tightened instantly. The knife rose another inch. He stopped. Without looking directly at her, he unfastened the worn leather gun belt and carefully laid it beside the revolver. Then he removed the hunting knife from his boot and placed it on top of the belt. One weapon, then another, until nothing remained except a tired rancher standing beneath the stars. "If I wanted to hurt you," he said quietly, "I would have done it before you found your knife." The words were simple. They carried no pride, only fact. She searched his face. No smile, no challenge, no hidden bargain waiting beneath polite manners. Only a man who looked as weary as the road behind him. "My name is Jacob," he said after another long silence. She did not answer. Instead, she asked, "Why did you come back?" "I heard someone scream." "You didn't know who I was?" "No." "You didn't know whether I deserved saving?" Jacob glanced into the fire. "I never asked." The answer unsettled her far more than any explanation could have. She had spent 3 years learning that every act of kindness arrived with invisible chains. Food had conditions. Shelter had conditions. Protection had conditions. Everything had a price. Everything. She looked toward the canteen resting on the flat stone between them. "You drink first." Jacob nodded once. He walked forward only as far as the stone, picked up the canteen, drank deeply, then returned it to exactly the same place before stepping back again. He never moved another inch. Minutes passed. Finally, she lowered the knife just enough to reach the water. She drank cautiously, only one swallow, then another. Her shoulders relaxed almost imperceptibly. Jacob noticed she had not eaten. He reached into his saddlebag, removed a small cloth bundle, and placed it beside the canteen. Inside rested dried venison and 2 pieces of coarse bread. Again, he stepped away without a word. "What do you want?" she asked. "Nothing." No man wants nothing. He looked toward the moon rising above the canyon walls. "My father used to say something." She waited. "He said the quickest way to prove your character," Jacob paused, "was to walk away before anyone owed you gratitude." The fire burned lower. Neither of them spoke again. Much later, when Jacob spread his blanket beneath a weathered juniper tree nearly 30 feet from the fire, instead of sleeping beside it, the Apache widow watched him with growing confusion. Every man she had met since becoming a widow had tried to move closer. This one had deliberately chosen distance. She tightened her fingers around the knife. Yet for the first time in years, she fell asleep before the blade slipped from her hand. Dawn arrived quietly. Golden light spilled over the canyon walls, chasing away the cold shadows of the desert night. Tiny drops of dew clung to stubborn patches of sagebrush, while a gentle breeze carried the scent of cedar and dry earth across the sleeping valley. Jacob had been awake for nearly an hour. The campfire had already burned down to glowing embers. Coffee simmered inside a blackened tin pot, suspended over fresh coals. He worked without making unnecessary noise. Some habits became second nature after years of living alone. Others came from respecting another person's sleep. Across the fire, the Apache widow slowly opened her eyes. Her hand reached instinctively for the knife. Only after her fingers found it still lying beside her did the tightness leave her shoulders. Jacob noticed. He pretended not to. Instead, he poured coffee into his own battered cup. The second cup remained untouched beside the pot. He never offered it. He simply left it there. Choice mattered. She sat up carefully. The wound beneath her torn sleeve had stiffened during the night. When she tried to move her arm, pain crossed her face before she managed to hide it. Jacob looked toward the rising sun instead of looking at her injury. "You'll need clean bandages." "I've managed before." "I know." Silence followed. "You'll manage tomorrow too." Again, no argument. No insistence. Only quiet observation. She stood slowly and walked toward a narrow stream winding between smooth stones a short distance from camp. Jacob waited until she disappeared behind a cluster of cottonwoods before opening his saddlebag. Inside rested a small roll of clean linen, a bottle of whiskey, and a packet of dried herbs wrapped in cloth. He carried them to a flat rock beside the stream. Without calling her name, without looking toward the trees, he placed everything where she could easily find it. Then he turned around and walked back toward camp. When Ayana emerged from behind the trees several minutes later, she stopped. The supplies waited alone. The cowboy did not. She looked back. Jacob sat with his back facing her, quietly repairing a broken leather rein as though nothing else in the world deserved his attention. Her brow tightened. She stared at the bandages, then at him. then back again. Carefully, she picked up the whiskey bottle. A folded scrap of paper rested beneath it. Only 4 words had been written in careful handwriting. Take only what helps. Nothing more. No signature. No request. No debt. For several long moments, she simply stood there. She cleaned the wound herself, wrapped fresh linen around her shoulder, returned the unused herbs exactly where she had found them. Even the bottle of whiskey remained half full. When she walked back toward camp, Jacob was saddling his horse. "We should leave before the heat comes," he said. She frowned. "You assume I'm riding with you." "I assume the men from yesterday will return." She glanced toward the distant canyon where the outlaws had disappeared. Deep inside, she knew he was right. Those men had not looked like people willing to forget humiliation. "I know another trail," Jacob continued. "Less traveled." She crossed her arms. "Why tell me?" "So you can decide whether to take it." Again, the decision belonged to her. She hated that it confused her. For years, every choice had been stolen before she could make it. Now this stranger kept handing them back as though they had always been hers. Without another word, she mounted the small paint horse the outlaws had abandoned. The 2 riders moved into the morning, 20 yards apart, neither beside the other, neither behind. Only 2 lonely figures crossing an endless frontier, separated by distance, and slowly bridged by respect neither of them yet understood. Far behind them, hidden high among weathered cliffs, surmounted silhouettes watched the pair disappear into the desert. One rider smiled coldly. "They're heading exactly where the marshal said they would." His companion adjusted the rifle across his saddle. "This time, the cowboy won't leave alive." By midday, the desert had become a furnace. Heat shimmered above the endless stretch of sandstone, turning distant cliffs into wavering ghosts beneath the cloudless sky. Every hoofbeat stirred pale dust that lingered in the still air long after the horses had passed. Jacob rode ahead, not leading, simply following the only trail that still held enough shade before sunset. Ayanna remained several horse lengths behind him, close enough to watch, far enough to leave. She still had not decided which mattered more. The silence between them had begun to change. It no longer felt like fear. It felt like 2 strangers waiting for time to explain what words could not. Near the base of a weathered mesa, Jacob suddenly raised one hand. The horses stopped instantly. "What is it?" Ayanna asked. He didn't answer. Instead, he dismounted and knelt beside the trail. Fresh hoofprints. 5 horses. 1 wagon. Less than half a day old. He brushed the dust gently with 2 fingers before looking toward the western ridge. "They're ahead of us." The men from yesterday? Maybe. His eyes narrowed. Maybe someone worse. Without another word, he led both horses off the main trail and into a narrow canyon lined with ancient juniper trees. By late afternoon, dark clouds gathered over the mountains. The first drops of rain struck the rocks with soft, scattered taps. Jacob pointed toward an abandoned line shack built against the cliff face. "We'll wait out the storm." The cabin was small. 1 room, a stone fireplace, a broken table, enough shelter for 2 people who still trusted each other very little. Jacob tied the horses beneath the overhang before gathering fallen branches already sheltered from the rain. Within minutes, a small fire crackled inside the cabin. Warmth slowly pushed back the evening chill. Ayanna remained near the doorway, watching him carefully. He removed his soaked hat, hung it on a nail, then placed his saddlebag beside the wall. Without thinking twice, he walked back outside. "Where are you going?" she asked. "More firewood. It's raining, so we'll need more." The door closed behind him. She stood alone inside the quiet cabin. The fire danced across rough wooden walls. Steam rose gently from her damp shawl. Her eyes drifted toward the weathered saddlebag resting beside the hearth. She looked away, then back again. Curiosity could be as relentless as hunger. Slowly, she knelt beside it. The flap had not been tied shut. Inside lay neatly folded clothes, extra ammunition, coffee beans, and a small leather pouch worn smooth by years of travel. She hesitated, then opened it. A silver ring rested inside. Simple, plain, polished by countless hands. Beneath the ring lay a folded letter, its edges faded with age. She froze. Every instinct told her to close the pouch. Instead, she unfolded the first page. Only one sentence caught her eye before the cabin door creaked open behind her. "If anything happens to me," the letter began, Promise me you will never let grief make you forget how to protect another person's dignity." Ayanna looked up sharply. Jacob stood in the doorway, rain dripping from the brim of his hat. His arms were full of firewood. He saw the letter. He saw the silver ring. For several long seconds, neither moved, neither spoke. Jacob quietly set the firewood beside the hearth. Then, without anger, without accusation, he simply asked, "Did you find the answer you were looking for?" Outside, thunder rolled across the mountains. Inside, for the first time since they had met, Ayanna found herself unable to meet his eyes. Rain continued to whisper against the cabin roof long after neither of them could find another word to say. Jacob carefully folded the letter. He slipped it back beneath the silver ring exactly as Ayanna had found it. There was no anger in his movements, only respect. He tied the leather pouch shut and returned it to the saddlebag before feeding another branch into the fire. The flames rose gently between them. "I shouldn't have opened it," Ayanna said at last. "No." His answer came without bitterness. "But you did." She lowered her eyes. "I thought." Her voice faded. Jacob looked into the fire instead of at her. "I know what you thought." The silence that followed felt different from every silence before it. Not sharp, not suspicious, simply honest. After several minutes, Ayanna spoke again. "Who was Eleanor?" Jacob's hand rested quietly on his knee. "My fiancée." The words barely rose above the sound of rain. "We were supposed to marry in the spring." Ayanna waited. He rarely volunteered more than a sentence. This time, he continued. "Fever came before spring did. The cabin seemed smaller. The fire burned lower. I couldn't save her. No tears. No trembling voice. Only the calm weight of grief carried for many years." Ayanna looked toward the folded letter. "She wrote that." Jacob nodded. "The night before she died." He smiled faintly. "She always believed pain could make a man either kinder or crueler." His eyes remained fixed on the flames. "She asked me to choose kindness." Outside, thunder drifted farther into the mountains. The storm was passing. Inside the cabin, something else was beginning to pass as well. For the first time, Ayanna understood why every act of respect had seemed effortless. It had never been performed to earn her trust. It had simply become the way Jacob chose to live. A sudden sound shattered the quiet. A horse. Then another. Hoofbeats. Close. Jacob's head lifted instantly. He extinguished the lantern with one quick motion. Darkness swallowed the cabin except for the fading glow of the fireplace. "Stay back," he whispered. The riders stopped outside. Low voices drifted through the rain. "I told you they came this way. Check the cabin." Jacob silently opened the rear window, just wide enough to look outside. 3 horses. No, 4. One carried a polished silver badge. That caught the fading light. The marshal. Ayanna felt her heartbeat quicken. "They found us." Jacob quietly closed the window. He reached for his revolver, then paused. He looked at her. "If we run now, they'll follow." She finished the sentence for him. He nodded. Another knock struck the cabin door. Harder this time. "Open up," a voice shouted. "United States Marshal." Jacob glanced toward the narrow back trail climbing into the rocks behind the cabin. There was only one horse path, too narrow for riders to travel side by side. A chance. Not a good one, but enough. He handed Ayanna the rifle. She stared at him. "You trust me with this?" "I trusted you yesterday." She swallowed quietly. The words settled deep inside her. Outside, another blow shook the cabin door. Jacob placed one finger against his lips, then slowly reached for the latch. The moment the door burst inward, rain and cold wind rushed inside. But the cabin stood empty. The back window swung gently in the storm. The marshal cursed. "They're heading for Raven Pass." Jacob and Ayanna were already climbing the narrow mountain trail beyond the cabin, disappearing into the darkness together. For the first time since they had met, they were no longer riding 20 yards apart. The storm had washed the desert clean. Moonlight spilled across Raven Pass, turning jagged cliffs into pale silver walls rising on both sides of the narrow trail. Rainwater trickled between the rocks, carrying the scent of wet cedar and fresh earth into the cool night air. Jacob rode in silence. Ayanna kept pace beside him. For the first time since their paths had crossed, neither watched the other with suspicion. Both watched the darkness ahead. Behind them, distant hoofbeats echoed through the canyon. Not close. Not yet. But steady. Marshal Harlan Pierce was still following. The trail climbed sharply toward a ridge where only one rider could pass at a time. Loose stones shifted beneath the horses' hooves, forcing them to slow. Jacob suddenly raised his hand. "We walk from here." Ayanna nodded without question. Together they led the horses along the narrow ledge. The valley stretched hundreds of feet below, hidden beneath drifting fog. After nearly half an hour, they reached a windswept overlook. Jacob knelt beside the ground. Fresh tracks. 6 horses. He studied them quietly. They split up. Ayanna frowned. "To surround us?" "No." He pointed toward another set of prints. "To force us where they want." She looked toward the only open trail ahead. It curved gently through a broad basin surrounded by cliffs. "Easy riding." "Too easy." "You saw it the moment we climbed here," she said. Jacob stood slowly. "My father taught me something." "What?" "When a road suddenly becomes comfortable, someone else has already chosen it for you." Without another word, he turned away from the wide trail and began climbing an almost invisible path winding through broken granite and twisted pine roots. The climb was exhausting. Several times Ayanna nearly lost her footing. Each time Jacob reached out instinctively. Each time, he stopped before touching her. Instead, he extended a sturdy tree branch or offered his hand only after waiting for her nod. The smallest gestures had become their own language. Near dawn they reached the summit. The eastern horizon glowed faintly beneath a blanket of soft gray clouds. For a brief moment, the world felt untouched. Then came the rifle shot. The bullet struck a boulder beside Jacob, sending sharp fragments across the narrow ridge. The horses bolted. Another shot followed. Then another. Voices echoed from both sides of the mountain. "They're above us." "And below," Jacob answered calmly. Figures emerged among the rocks. 3 riders on one ridge. For more climbing from the valley, Marshal Pierce rode slowly into view, his polished badge gleaming beneath the first light of dawn. His smile carried no warmth. "You've made this harder than necessary, Walker." Jacob stepped slightly in front of Ayanna. Pierce noticed. "So that's what this is." He laughed quietly. "A cowboy dying for an Apache widow." Jacob's expression never changed. "No." His voice remained calm. "A man standing where he should." Pierce removed a folded document from inside his coat. "Federal warrant." He held it high. "Ayanna is wanted for the murder of 2 Army traitors and the theft of government property." Ayanna stared at the paper. "It's a lie." Jacob never looked at the warrant. Instead, he looked directly at Pierce. "If you've got the truth." He paused. "You won't need 7 rifles." The marshal's smile slowly disappeared. For a long second, no one moved. The wind whispered through the pines. Then Pierce quietly lowered the warrant and raised his rifle instead. The sound of the hammer locking into place echoed across the mountain. Ayanna instinctively reached for Jacob's sleeve. This time, he didn't step away. Ignatius did not sleep that night. The old silver badge rested on the table beside the oil lamp, catching the trembling flame each time the wind found a crack in the cabin walls. Outside, the horses shifted uneasily. Even the cattle remained strangely quiet, as if the valley itself understood that dawn would carry more than sunlight. He stepped onto the porch before first light. The air smelled of sage, damp earth, and the fading smoke from cooking fires somewhere beyond the eastern ridge. Then he heard them. Not war drums. Not battle cries. Hoofbeats. Slow. Measured. Too disciplined to belong to outlaws. 1 rider became 5. 5 became 20. Then the rising dust revealed dozens more stretching across the valley floor like a moving river of leather, feathers, and steel. Every ranch hand reached instinctively for a rifle. Ignatius raised one hand. "No." The single word stopped them all. They didn't come here to fight. No one questioned him, because something in his voice carried certainty stronger than fear. The riders stopped nearly 50 yards from the ranch house. Silence settled over everyone. Not the frightened silence before violence. The respectful silence before judgment. At their front rode Chief Nantan. He dismounted without hurry. His age showed in the silver woven through his dark braid, but nothing about his posture suggested weakness. He carried no rifle, only a weathered cedar box wrapped carefully in red cloth. Every warrior behind him remained perfectly still. Not one hand touched a weapon. Chief Nantan walked alone toward the porch. Ignatius stepped down to meet him halfway. Neither man spoke immediately. The wind carried dust between them before the chief finally nodded. You kept your promise. Ignatius answered quietly. I only returned what never belonged to me. For a long moment, neither looked away. Years of suspicion between two worlds seemed to stand there with them. Then Chief Nantan slowly unwrapped the cloth. Inside rested an old medicine pouch. Its leather had faded with age. Its beadwork had been repaired countless times by careful hands. Ignatius recognized it instantly. The healer's pouch, he whispered. My mother carried it. Nantan nodded. And now it carries your family's name. The old chief placed the pouch into Ignatius's hands. Not as payment, not as reward, as trust. Behind them, every Apache warrior struck the butt of his spear gently against the earth. Once, the sound rolled across the valley like distant thunder. No cheering followed. Respect required no applause. Sheriff Dawson, standing among the ranch hands, removed his hat without realizing he had done so. Even Elijah Mercer remained frozen near his wagon. For the first time since arriving in the territory, the wealthy landowner understood something money could never purchase. Honor could not be bought, only earned. Chief Nantan finally turned toward Mercer. His voice remained calm. You wish to own this valley. Mercer swallowed. I made mistakes. No. The chief shook his head. You believed land belonged only to those who held paper. He pointed slowly toward Ignatius. He understood long ago that land remembers hands before signatures. Mercer lowered his eyes. No argument came, because every witness standing there already knew who possessed the greater authority. The old chief smiled for the first time. A small smile, almost invisible. My granddaughter asked me why your people build fences. Ignatius waited. I told her fences protect cattle. The chief looked across the open valley. But good men never build fences around kindness. Neither man laughed. Neither needed to. The morning sun finally climbed over the mountains, washing both men in the same golden light. Different blood, different histories, the same quiet dignity. And as the long shadows disappeared from the valley floor, no one could remember exactly where one world ended and the other began. Autumn arrived without asking permission. The cottonwoods along the creek turned gold one leaf at a time, until the entire valley seemed to glow beneath the evening sun. Seasons changed the land the way forgiveness changed a heart, slowly enough that no one noticed until everything looked different. Ignatius never became famous. Travelers passed through the territory and spoke of the ranch where Apache riders and settlers shared the same well without fear. Some believed the stories. Others laughed and called them frontier legends. Ignatius never argued. Truth had no need to defend itself. Each morning, he repaired fences. Each afternoon, he rode the grazing fields. Each evening, he placed fresh water beneath the old cedar tree where his mother had once rested after long days beneath the western sun. The medicine pouch remained inside the cabin. Not displayed, not hidden, simply kept where memories belonged. Months later, Sheriff Dawson resigned his badge. People expected another lawman. Instead, they found him teaching children from every family willing to attend. White settlers sitting beside Apache boys and girls on rough wooden benches beneath an open roof. No one planned it. It simply happened. Elijah Mercer sold most of the land he had once tried to seize. He left the territory quietly. Before departing, he stopped at Ignatius's ranch carrying a folded deed. I can't undo what I nearly became, he admitted. But perhaps I can stop someone else from making the same mistake. He donated the disputed valley to remain common grazing land. No family would ever own it again. Ignatius accepted neither thanks nor apology. Only the paper. Then he folded it away. Chief Nantan never returned with a procession after that day. He no longer needed to. Sometimes a single rider appeared near sunset. Sometimes only smoke from distant campfires drifted across the hills. That was enough. Friendship did not require constant words. One winter evening, a young ranch boy asked Ignatius the question adults had wondered for years. Weren't you afraid when hundreds of warriors rode to your house? Ignatius smiled while sharpening an old fence tool. I was. The boy blinked. But everyone says you never feared them. I never feared them. He looked toward the mountains where snow already crowned the highest peaks. I feared becoming the kind of man who believed another human deserved less kindness because they were born different. The boy thought quietly about those words. Long after the conversation ended, years passed. Children grew into parents. Parents became grandparents. The valley changed hands many times, But one story survived every generation. Not the story of the wealthy man who lost his pride. Not the story of warriors who crossed the plains. Not even the story of an old medicine pouch. People remembered something much smaller. A rancher who chose honesty when deceit would have been easier. A chief who answered respect with respect. Two men from different worlds who discovered that dignity speaks a language older than hatred. And if you ride through that valley at sunrise, when the grass still carries dew and the only sound is the wind brushing against cedar branches, the old-timers will tell you to look carefully. Not for buried treasure, not for forgotten battlefields, but for the weathered fence standing beside a lonely cedar tree. Because they say every post reminds the land of a simple truth. Justice is loud only when it arrives too late. Real justice comes quietly. It mends. It waits. It remembers. And long after names have faded from gravestones and history books, the smallest act of honor still echoes farther than the loudest gunshot ever could. Out here, beneath the endless western sky, that was always enough. Years later, travelers still slowed their horses when they crossed that quiet valley. Most of them had never met Ignatius. Some arrived after hearing fragments of the story in distant railroad towns. Others had listened to aging buffalo hunters speak about the ranch where an Apache chief once rode without drawing a weapon. Every version sounded different. Every teller remembered another detail. Yet they all ended with the same silence. Because some stories grow too honest for embellishment. By then, the old ranch house had weathered countless winters. The porch boards creaked beneath familiar boots. The cedar tree had grown taller, its roots reaching deeper into the earth where so many lives had quietly changed. Children who had once chased each other across the fields now returned as adults, bringing sons and daughters of their own. They always stopped beneath that tree. Not because anyone ordered them to, because it somehow felt right. One spring afternoon, a young girl noticed the worn silver badge resting beside the medicine pouch inside the cabin. She looked at Ignatius with innocent curiosity. "Were you a lawman?" The old rancher smiled faintly. "No." "Then why do you keep the badge?" Ignatius picked it up with careful hands. The silver had long since lost its shine. "It reminds me." "Of what?" "That justice and authority are not always the same thing." The little girl frowned, trying to understand. Ignatius simply placed the badge back beside the pouch. One represented the law. The other represented trust. Neither meant much without character. Outside, the evening wind carried the scent of fresh rain across the valley. Far beyond the ridge, riders appeared once again. Not warriors. Not soldiers. Neighbors. Settlers. Apache families. Mexican ranchers. Freedmen who had built new lives after old chains had disappeared. They gathered without invitation. Someone repaired a broken wagon wheel. Another family brought fresh bread. Children laughed together without asking which language the others spoke at home. No one remembered when that had become ordinary. Perhaps that was the greatest miracle of all. Not that hatred had been defeated, but that kindness had become routine. As darkness settled over the prairie, lanterns glowed one by one across the ranch. The stars slowly filled the enormous western sky. Ignatius sat quietly on the porch, listening to distant horses and gentle conversation carried by the breeze. No speeches, no ceremonies, no monuments carved from stone. Only ordinary people choosing, once again, to treat one another with simple decency. He closed his eyes for a moment. Somewhere in the distance, a lone coyote called into the night. The sound echoed across hills that no longer belonged to fear. When dawn arrived the following morning, the valley looked exactly as it always had. Golden grass, weathered fences, morning mist rising from the creek. Nothing appeared Remar.